So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Brooklands Museum. Thank you so much for joining us today as we celebrate the 50th anniversary of Delta Golf's first flight. We've got an amazing panel for you this afternoon, and I'm going to introduce them. You'll have to excuse me, I've got a little bit of a cheat sheet because they've all had such incredible careers that I needed to make some notes, so apologies. I'd like to introduce you to Michael Bannister. He's the Chief Concorde Pilot and Vice Chairman of the Trust here at Brooklands Museum. Thank you. Terry Selman. He was an overseas line station engineer with BA and provided engineering support on Delta Golf while the aircraft was at Fairford and Rising Alton during the initial flight crew training programme. Allan Winn is our former CEO and Director of Brooklands and was involved in the fight of getting Delta Golf here to us here at Brooklands Museum. Gordon Roxburgh, founder of Concorde SST website, he used the power of the internet to bring together and lead a group of over 100 volunteers, many new to Brooklands Museum and to aircraft engineering, for that matter, to help restore Delta Golf. The team also worked on the restoration of the Concorde simulator that we house here. JOCK LOWE is a former Concorde pilot and one of the few pilots who actually flew on Delta Golf. With that in mind, I'd like to now pass you across to Mike Bannister, who will do an introduction to you guys, and we'll get on with the panel talk with Q&As at the end. Many thanks.
Thanks, Mary. I think that deserves a round of applause. I tell you what, it's dead easy to stand up here and say we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for, but we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for Mary. Mary's put all this together and has done a fantastic job. Well done, Mary. Thank you very much indeed. Now, we all know why we're here. We're here to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the first flight of Delta Golf. But it's so much more than that. Our Concorde, excuse me for saying our Concorde, because that's what she is here at Brooklands, is the jewel of the aviation collection. The Napier Rail is the jewel of the motoring collection. And she is one of the things that makes Brooklands stand out from so many other museums around the world. And I believe that the way that the team who have got her here, looked after her and presented her to the public day in and day out, make her stand out from every other Concorde that is available for public viewing. I think we've got the best Concorde exhibits in the world. We've definitely got the largest because we've got Delta Golf, we've got the simulator, we've got the largest spares collection in the world. We're lucky enough to be able to call on some very large group of ex-Concorde people, pilots, engineers, cabin crew, who can bring this aircraft back to life. And I say back to life because historically it is. It's over 20 years since the last Concorde ever flew. But you only have to look at the face of one of the 14,000 plus schoolchildren who come around here every year on visits to see how inspired they are by just being on board and hearing the story and being able to go through this wonderful aeroplane and realise what it did and how the people who made it possible were so motivated and innovative in what they did. And they have great smiles on their faces when they get off, and that refreshes all of us that were included in the Concorde team. It is a fascinating story. Arguably, the museum would not be what it is today without Concorde, because, as we'll talk about later, when she arrived here, she significantly improved our footfall. We thought it would dip again after a while, but it didn't, but I'm sure Alan will talk about that. So the plan is that we will step through between us the history of Delta Golf from the very earliest days of thinking about this particular project and putting together how the test program would be and building the aeroplane through flying her to begin with and making her an integral and very important part of that test program, through the retirement of the aeroplane, through the decision that Delta Golf could come here, through where we are today and on to the future. And we kind of plan that that'll take just over half an hour maybe, and then any opportunity for any of you that might have some questions, we'll see what we can do to answer them. So that's kind of the plan. So may I hand over to Terry? The first step in any aeroplane's history is how the heck was it built, why was it built, and how did you get around to making such a wonderful job of such a technically difficult job? Ladies and gentlemen, Terry.
Thank you. Great. Anyway, I was the overseas line engineer with BA, and in fact, I was in Bangkok at the time. I was asked to get involved with Concorde. So I was asked to come back to Bristol and do a course back in Bristol. And the course was 3 months long in the classroom, which kept me occupied for quite a long time. And afterwards going on to the simulator to get approval to do engine runs, etc., etc. On the course, I had 3 Americans with me, 1 from Washington, 2 from New York. And the one thing that they were amazed was the first time we ever walked down to see the aeroplane being manufactured, in amongst all the buildings, they couldn't believe that some of the buildings still had World War II camouflage on them, and there we were building Concordes in these buildings, which was amazing. But we also had a CAA surveyor on the course as well, and unfortunately, I don't know why now, but the CAA surveyor don't have to pass the exam, and the rest of us do, and I don't understand that, but never mind. Anyway, so after completing the course, I then got posted to RAF Fairford. Initially, the training on Delta Golf started at RAF Fairford, and so off we went there to do that. And one of the early problems I had was, of course, with the aeroplane doing crew training, we were doing lots of touch and goes and lots of landings, so one thing that would wear out are the tyres. Just a simple, really simple thing like tyres. And BA back in London gave us this massive jack. It literally needed 2 people to push the thing under the aeroplane to be able to lift the wheels, to be able to change the tyres, etc. We would be doing a lot of those. Unfortunately, it didn't have any oil in it, all right? And this little RAF man said to me, he said, "Oh, we've got some oil." He said, "I can fill that up for you." So he took the jack away, they towed it away because it was so big. He came back and, of course, they put the wrong oil in it. So that was a bit of a problem, really. We had to get back in touch with London to send us out a new jack to start replacing all the wheels and tyres, which did come up fairly regularly. The actual crew training used to usually start at about 10 o'clock in the morning, and you'd then get about a 2-hour flight, and the aeroplane would come back, and we'd have a look, and hopefully we could keep it serviceable ready for the afternoon flights as well. So, excuse me. So one of the things with aircraft, and if you've got any links with aircraft, is how important it is for all the placards on an aeroplane to be correct. In the maintenance manual, there's even a whole section on what placards should be fitted, and these placards show all the emergency exits where they should be. They show how to open and close doors, etc., etc. And we thought, well, we should make up our own placard for this aeroplane. It was doing crew training, so we thought a suitable one would be that. And we stuck that on the nose wheel, on the nose here. And amazingly, this actually remained on the aeroplane. I couldn't believe it actually stayed stuck to the nose undercarriage for quite a long time. But it was on training flights, so we actually stuck that on the nose gear. But that's quite interesting. So as I say, the crew training all started off at Fairford, and then for some reason it moved to Brize Norton. I'm not sure why. Most of the aeroplane was quite serviceable. There were a few avionics problems, throttle amplifiers and things like this would go wrong. I think one of the worst jobs we had to do, we had a bird strike which took out one of the windshields, and to change a windshield on a Concorde is not a job you want to take on. It was a nightmare to be able to change it. Fortunately, at Brize Norton we had the use of a hangar there, so we could put the aeroplane in the hangar and change the windshield overnight. But it was a bird strike that had done it. Another problem we had was a leaking door seal. Now, Concorde, the fuselage on Concorde, Delta Golf, they're all the same. Very, very flexible. So if you wanted to sort out anything like this, one of the problems we had to do was rejig the doors. Now, Concorde, the actual fuselage is very, very flexible, very flexible. So you have to get the fuselage in the right position to be able to jig the doors to make them fit properly to stop these seals from leaking. There's 2 ways you can do it. If the aeroplane's on jacks, you have to have a specific fuel load in the tanks to make sure the aeroplane's level and where it should be. If it's on the ground, you have to tow it 20 feet forwards in a straight line to try and straighten the fuselage. So it was quite a funny thing to have to do to be able to rig the doors. The problem we had, of course, Delta Golf was involved in this, really. The problem that they had, of course, was because of this flexible fuselage, the aeroplane also had a very stiff undercarriage. And so it was very, very susceptible to vibration, severe vibration, going down certain runways. If the runway wasn't very, very smooth, it was a real problem. And of course, they used Delta Golf. They took the aeroplane out to Singapore because it was a particularly rough runway. And again, the vibration was so significant that it could have caused problems with the crew during takeoff run. The vibration was so bad they might even not be able to concentrate if there was an emergency. The other thing was it would restrict what airfields the aeroplane could operate from because the vibration was so bad. But then they also had another problem that it could also restrict the structural fatigue life of the aeroplane, so they had to do something about it. Initially, they started using what was the simulator for the TSR-2 aeroplane, which they built here. Of course, they built 5 of them here, and they used that to try and simulate what the problem was. Eventually, they did find out what the problem was. The people at Farnborough, the boffins at Farnborough, worked it all out. And what it was, the main undercarriage was just far too stiff, and so the aeroplane was really shaking badly on takeoff. So what they did, they modified that particular oleo struts to make them a lot softer, and that sort of more or less overcame the problem. There is still a slight problem, but they overcome it now with what they call the little green go light. But it's, anyway, that was the sort of initial bits. So that was the end of my sort of training, really, at Fairford. That was the final bit. And then shortly after that, I was posted out to Bahrain for the very first commercial flight. So I didn't see Delta Golf again for a long, long time until I came back to Brooklands one day, and I suddenly realised there was an old friend of mine here. And so I decided to sign up as a volunteer 10, 11 years ago now. So and I do the sort of normal tours, and I do the technical tours here. So that's it, really. I'll pass over. Yeah.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for this. Is amazing. 20 years after the last flight, there's still this enthusiasm for this beautiful aeroplane. Have you ever thought why? And it was a fairly well-known psychologist who described it once in a book. He said, if you have a left brain, the engineering type, they like symmetry and straight lines and probably were able to concentrate at school, your left brain. If you're right brain, then you probably daydreamed at school and like drawing and space and creation. He said, now, which half of your brain does Concorde really appeal to? And of course, it's one of the few things that appeals to both sides of the brain. You're an engineer or an artist, Concorde's just right. Now, I won't give you a long-term problem, but try and think of something else that achieves that. That is actually beautiful to look at, but looks right to the engineers, and it works so well. Anyway, my reason, or my path here, is a set of coincidences. On my 25th birthday was the first flight of the Concorde from Filton. And so I thought, yeah, that's a good job, that's what I'll try and do. Little thinking that in 6 odd years' time, I'd be flying. Well, I was lucky enough to be in the trade union evaluation team, so I'd flown the Concorde simulator down into Toulouse, and I'd done 2 flights where I did circuits and bumps, but I promise you, they were over in a flash. I couldn't remember very much about them at all. But then I came to have a flight at Delta Golf with Brian Trubshaw flying. A chap called Brian Ratford was the other pilot, and I got invited along because I was on this evaluation team. We didn't know much, we hadn't done any courses or anything, and we're going to prove some of the performance data of the aeroplane by flying out to the middle of the Atlantic and then coming back. Now that's where Delta Golf is immensely important in the history of Concorde, because all the real data for the fuel flow, the performance, and so on, was validated by Delta Golf. That was the production level aeroplane. The other 2 aeroplanes in the UK were test aeroplanes. So it played a major part in actually getting the aeroplane certified and getting the data ready for operation and service, which is different to testing. And I learned it was different in testing on this flight with Delta Golf, with Brian Trubshaw driving. And on takeoff, I'm sitting behind him, and I'm still all eyes everywhere, you can imagine. And there was been a little problem with the brakes, and so thinking on the takeoff, because the acceleration rate was so great, even though we were quite heavy, and I'm thinking his eyes will be glued to the front. But we had a little problem with the brake, and he kept looking backwards. I'm thinking, Brian, will you look to the front? So off we went. And it was just a really great experience to see them operate the test crews and so on. We got as far as we had to go, and one of the test engineers came up and said, right, well, we're finished. So we're now Mark II, twice the speed of sound, 50-odd thousand feet, and that's one of the most critical points of Concorde because you're near maximum Q. That's where the dynamic pressure is the greatest over static pressure. So the little bit I knew was that this is a very sensitive little aeroplane. You've got to treat it with care. Well, as soon as they told Brian he'd finished, so I'm thinking, right, we'll gently turn round to go back. Not a bit of it. Almost over on its side, and we're turning back and going back to Bristol. So that's when I first learned that actually it might be delicate in some areas, but it's actually a very sturdy aeroplane. And he could, at this particular point, still throw it around and went back. And when we got subsonic, transonic, then it was my turn to fly it. Now, one of the things that everybody was concerned about with this, all the Concordes, was the oscillations. You can get, surprisingly, you can get oscillations in pitch, and you can get oscillations in roll and yaw. And they were quite concerned that average line pilot would not be able to deal with this. And indeed, the Pan Am test pilot, I think he really had controls taken away from him, and Troubleshoot had to save the aeroplane. So I still remember Brian sitting me in the seat and get used to flying, and then we started doing this pilot-induced oscillation routine in mechanical signalling for any of you who watched that. So the aeroplane is very sloppy, it hasn't got auto-stabilization and so on. And it was fun. But if you've done Dutch rolling on the VC-10, which is out there, then Dutch rolling on the Concorde, which is what it's called, isn't too bad. But it took, I promise you, it took all my consideration, concentration and considerations to what was happening, but it was real. So hence I remember it, nearly 50 years ago, and I can still remember those three events: the takeoff, the turn at supersonic speed, and then seeing the outer bit of what Concorde would do. And they took over and came back and landed. But it was a great experience, and little did I think when I saw that first aeroplane in '69 that I'd end up, there's only 3 of us now alive that have flown this aeroplane. But I'm so glad that the whole of the Brooklands setup, and Allan will talk now about getting it here, it kept it going, and that it's still got the attraction, the appeal. You here is just fantastic, and I was just so lucky to be involved in it. And echoing what Mike said, it's good that Mary's brought everything together so we can all enjoy the memories and still see that beautiful aeroplane that still looks right. It still looks like a modern aeroplane out there. So thank you for coming, and I'll now hand over to Allan, who will... Mike, who will talk about bringing it here in the end.
I'm hugely envious because I never flew Delta Golf, but Delta Golf then played an integral and very, very, very important part of the Concorde story. Of course, she carried on doing what she did after Concorde went into service in 1976. 1976, she started together with both British Airways and Air France, and for 27 years she flew successfully. Delta Golf was a trailblazer. She was the fastest Concorde, the highest Concorde. She was the first Concorde ever to carry 100 passengers at twice the speed of sound, the first aircraft ever to carry 100 passengers at twice the speed of sound. And she blazed the way for a highly successful period of operations for British Airways. With the 7 Concordes that British Airways had in service, we carried over 2.5 million people around the world in very, very comfortable surroundings, served by the best cabin crew in the world, with the best cuisine, the best wines. And so regular, and the punctuality was so good, and the aeroplane was so reliable because so much effort and engineering expertise went into looking after her. And what's more, it made a profit for British Airways. It made over £500 million real bottom line profit. But, rather like a perfect storm, certain things came together. There was that awful accident in Paris, which was terrible, where 113 people lost their lives, and we had to stop flying for the best part of a year while modifications were made to the aircraft to bring them back into service. Now, we at British Airways were determined to bring the airplane back into service because she had been so profitable for us. The story for Air France was kind of different. Within Air France, of course, it was their accident, and so that was much more emotionally charged for them. But also, initially, when the airplane came into service, the cost of supporting her had to be borne by somebody. So there's the infrastructure cost, the cost of the manufacturer's facilities, the real estate, the equipment, the employing people who would support the airplane if the two airlines needed to call on them. If you did call on them, you had to pay, somebody had to pay for that to be there. And these days, when Boeing and Airbus sell 1,600 airliners a year between them, a little bit of each sale pays for that infrastructure to be present. If you're only ever going to sell 14 aircraft, somebody's got to pay. And that somebody, lo and behold, is you and me, the British and the French taxpayer. The British and the French governments signed up to a deal where they would underwrite all of that infrastructure cost. In addition, because neither British Airways nor Air France wanted to fly the airplane at the time it came into service, the two governments agreed that they would underwrite any financial losses. And so consequently, because of that, they also wanted to take a large slice of any profits, which is understandable. And so both British Airways and Air France in the early stages were supported heavily by the UK and the French government, the UK and the French taxpayer, you and me. Now that was never really going to last for a very long period of time for BA because Lord King came in and said to certain people, one of whom is sitting in this room, JOCK, that if you can't make Concorde profitable within 2 years, you're going to stop the operation. And JOCK and Brian Walpole put their heads together and came up with a fantastic plan. If it hadn't been for those two, the operation would have probably died there and then. But they didn't. They turned it round for British Airways and turned it, hopefully we'll talk a little bit about that later on in the questions, and turned the whole operation around. And from that point forward, it was totally self-sustaining within BA. And it was at that point when British Airways technically gained ownership of Delta Golf and of the simulator. Air France didn't do that. Air France continued throughout their history underwritten by the French government. So after the accident, Air France not only had that terrible accident, they had massive losses on their books because they continued to make a loss because they were being subsidised. There was obviously a lot of pressure inside Air France because the law was changing and senior directors could be held personally responsible if there was an accident. And Air France was coming up for privatisation with a massive Concorde loss on the books. So what better way to get rid of that loss than stop operating the airplane? And so Air France made that decision. And that put British Airways in a difficult position because the support costs and all that infrastructure costs had been split between the two airlines. If Air France stopped, who's going to pay their share? Well, the French made it perfectly clear that they didn't intend to. And so it was going to be BA that had to pick up the whole lot of that cost. And it would have meant that British Airways would have been paying £100 million a year to the manufacturers before they moved an aeroplane an inch. And that's just unsustainable. So the very, very difficult decision was taken to retire the aircraft. And that decision was announced in April 2003, on April the 10th. With that comes a whole bunch of stuff. Now, as you might imagine, there have been lots of discussions inside BA about what we were going to do. Equally, as you might imagine, I was vehemently against retiring the aircraft, but my argument didn't win the day, and so they were faced with a choice. Do you throw your toys out the pram, or do you accept collective responsibility and get on with it? And I chose answer B. And I personally, and everyone around me, was determined that the retirement of Concorde would be a celebration, not a wake. Celebrating not just the 27 years of successful supersonic operation, but the fantastic work that 50,000 plus people had put into the airplane in the UK alone. From Terry designing and building it, through JOCK flying it in the very early days, through the line crews who flew it, the whole story revolves around wonderful groups of people. So we were determined to make sure that it was a celebration, which I hopefully you agree we did. Then at the end of that celebration, what the heck do we do with the 8 Concordes that British Airways owns, 7 that have been in commercial service and Delta Golf? I guess there were a number of options. One of them, we could have cut them all up into pieces. I don't think that would have been very popular. 2, we could have kind of just parked them somewhere and let the weather get to them. No, that's not going to be very popular. 3, why don't we make facilities for them to be on display at relevant places around the world? Yeah, that's a good idea. So that's exactly what we did. We tendered for people to say they would like a Concorde in their museum or their airport or whatever. We had over 800 applications from around the world. Of those 800, around about 80 were credible. And then one of the other caveats was it had to be somewhere with relevance to Concorde. So that means it's got to be somewhere that Concorde has a tie to. In the UK, we particularly wanted to have good geographical spread. So there were already a Concorde down in Yeovilton, and there's already a Concorde at Duxford, 2 of the prototypes. So we wanted to make sure that we had good spread across the UK. There had to be one in New York, because obviously New York was the #1 airport for Concorde movements, because both Air France and British Airways went there. There probably also had to be one at the Smithsonian in Washington, but that was going to be an Air France one, so that was another issue. Let's work with Air France to make sure that we do linked programs. We don't have anywhere to have 2, so we did that. We worked with Air France and worked our way through all the aircraft. By this stage, of the 8 aeroplanes, 5 were flyable. They had modifications. And 3, Alpha Bravo, Alpha Alpha and Delta Golf, were not flyable because they didn't have the modifications. So let's fly the 5 away first of all, which we did, and then let's fly home for the other 3. Well, Alpha Alpha went via the River Thames up the North Sea to the Museum of Scotland and East Fortune, where she resides today. Alpha Bravo is still on display at Heathrow, and you'll see it just north of the left-hand 27 left runway to this day, and British Airways are still pondering what to do with it 20 years later. And then there's Delta Golf. What do we do with Delta Golf? Well, she had gone to rack and ruin after she was acquired by BA in 1984, put into a hangar and used for spares, and she was in a terrible state. So whoever would want this burden around her neck? Well, there was a guy called Allan Winn, and he decided, along with his compatriots here at Brooklands and the trustee board, that they thought that getting Delta Golf here would be a really, really good idea. Fortunately, he was right. And that's why she's here today. So to tell that part of the story, I'll hand over to Allan and subsequently to Gordon.
Thanks, Mike. That sounds all very logical when Mike talks about it. We were part of that competition of the 800 odd people who thought they should have a Concorde. And I arrived here in May 2003, and there were 3 things on my plate. The caterers had just resigned. I found there was no money in the bank, couldn't afford to pay the wages for May, and we had to get the application for Concorde into BA by the end of May, 2.5 weeks after I started. We achieved that, got the application in, most of all thanks to people like Gordon, who we were just getting to know. Gordon had this Concorde SST web presence, and there was also, his headquarters was Green Man Pub, just outside Heathrow, where these lunatic Concorde enthusiasts used to gather and talk Concorde and watch it take off and do all that sort of thing. And that was where the whole thing came together, us working with BA, Gordon with Concorde SST. We wrote the application. Julian Temple, who's here somewhere in the right at the back, was the aviation curator at the time. We all got together, we got the application in, didn't know what was going to happen. And a couple of months later, Brian Mitchell, who was in charge of the physical end of disposing of Concordes, invited us to go to Filton to look at Delta Golf, ostensibly because the team here, under Julian and with Andy Lambert as a movements expert, had taken lots of aeroplanes apart and moved them here. So ostensibly, we went to Filton to look at Delta Golf to see whether it was feasible to take a Concorde apart to move it somewhere, because as Mike says, there were 3 non-flyable Concordes. What we saw, which I think we might see behind us, is a wreck. As Mike said, it was terrible. No engines, tailfin was off, it was in the hangar, nose was off because somebody broke a Concorde nose at Heathrow and they took the nose off, Delta Golf. and had just put the broken nose and the parts to repair it underneath the Delta Golf there instead. There's no undercarriage, it's just standing on a set of old airless wheels on steel RSJs. Lots of windows missing, absolutely no instruments or other things in the cockpit. Most of the floor panels were out. All the panels off the inspection panels off the wing were gone because they'd used Delta Golf to work out how to put the carbon fibre tank liners in after the Paris crash. It had the hardened cockpit door prototype for the post 9/11 things, complete with the RAM that would prove whether or not a 20-stone terrorist could actually break down the cockpit door. It was a complete and utter mess. One of the senior trustees here, I had a stand-up row with him because he was determined under no circumstances should we take on a burden like this absolute wreck of an aeroplane. It'd be better not to have a Concorde than to have one that was in bad condition as Delta Golf. Fortunately, BA indicated that we might get Delta Golf. We won the argument on the basis that it would give us a 10% increase in visitor numbers, which we desperately needed. If we had a Concorde here, I reckon that could give us a 10% increase in visitor numbers. More of that later. In the end, BA announced where all the aeroplanes are going just after they did their final flights, and we were rather desolated because when the announcement was made, they only told the world where the 7 service Concordes were going, didn't even mention Delta Golf in their press release. And so there was lots of toing and froing to get BA to actually admit that Delta Golf was coming here because everybody thought we'd failed to get one. Anyway, we got it, and then we had the problem of taking it apart to move it here because it was sitting at Filton. We looked at flying it under a big helicopter, Soviet B-26, could lift about 20 tons. But it certainly wasn't going to be able to lift 20 tons, which Gordon reckoned we could get a Concorde down to 20 tons by taking everything off it. But the thought of flying it at 10 knots from Filton to here, with an aircraft that had an endurance of about an hour, it was just completely impractical, quite apart from costing $250,000 to do it. Then the Highways Agency wouldn't let me move it on the road. We had to prove to them that it was impractical to move it by sea from Avonmouth round and up the Thames, and then in the end, we pointed out we were still going to have to move it for 50 miles on the M25. So then we had to agree how to take it apart. Lots of meetings at Filton and elsewhere discussing how we would do it. Formed a joint operation with East Fortune because they had to take Alpha Alpha apart so it could go down the Thames. And in the end, we got a scheme with ASI, who were the chosen aircraft dismantler, who we both used to take our aircraft apart. And then kicked in this fantastic volunteer-led operation on getting the aircraft, working out how to take it apart, and this fantastic support system here at Brooklands on transport, led by Andy Lambert, who roped in Cooks, roped in CJs, roped in Finchers, Langley, Auto Salvage. All these people got together. We moved a complete Concorde for less than 20,000 quid, where everybody else spent hundreds of thousands moving their aeroplanes around. It came here. In the end, we got most of the stuff in early 2004, and then Delta Golf had been moved to the fire dump at Filton. The guys in air traffic control at Filton were going mad because it was sticking up above the horizon and spoiling their radar system. So there was huge pressure to get it dismantled. We got it dismantled. It came here in 5 major bits. Prince Michael, who was here earlier, was here to receive it. We had a champagne reception when it finally arrived. That was at the beginning of June 2004, after lots of shenanigans, because the police insisted they had to escort it around the M25, because the M25 was dug up at the time. Then, 3 days before we were due to move it, they said, "Oh, sorry, we can't move it. We can't escort you that day. It's Derby Day. You'll have to do it yourselves," which we did. It came here, and then started a 2-year re-erection and restoration plan. We had to design a way of bolting the thing back together to be at least as strong as it had been before it was taken apart. And that's where Gordon and his team of volunteers became absolutely essential, because they masterminded everything other than the structural restoration, all the things, turning it from just a big chunk of metal in the shape of a Concorde into the amazing exhibit that we now have. It's all down to Gordon and his team, including loads of students from the University of Surrey, aided and abetted by people like the student liaison officer Ross Kelway, brought lots of students in to help. We had support from the academic staff at Surrey and all sorts of other people throwing things in, helping us along the way because we had no money. And my big job, once we'd actually secured the aeroplane, was to raise the money. We managed to persuade Dave McChrysler Finance, who would normally be putting up loans of 20,000 quid to buy for somebody to buy an E-Class Mercedes. They'd never financed an aeroplane before, but they gave us a substantial loan, about £150,000. We set up an appeal here, did all sorts of things, including selling sponsorship of the seats. If you look on the seats on Delta Golf now in the front rows, you still see little plaques saying that this was sponsored by so-and-so. We had a fantastic fundraising dinner here, which was the first outing of what is now the Don't Stop Me Now video that you see when you do the Concorde experience. And Gordon invented that just as sort of a thing to give us something to have as an emotional wallet opener for the fundraising dinner, and of course has become the theme of the Brooklands Concorde. So in the end we got the money, enough. BA were hugely helpful. They paid for taking it apart, cutting it up with diamond tip saws. We paid for the transport and putting it back together. Along the way, the Concorde simulator arrived. That's another story again, but it was just going to be a disabled, accessible cockpit at ground level, and all of a sudden it conspired to become a fully operational Concorde simulator again, which did all sorts of amazing things. In the end of July 2006, we opened it to the public, had a formal opening ceremony. Prince Michael cut the ribbon, and a week later we opened it to the public and just had this extraordinary experience of deluge of visitors coming in. Visitor numbers spiked, and when they sort of settled down after the school holidays, we thought, well, that's it, it'll just be a normal exhibit now. And when we looked at the numbers, by the end of the year, Concorde had given us a 40% increase in visitor numbers sustained, rather than the 10% that I'd guaranteed to the trustees. And our growth rate was not much steeper, on a steeper curve than it had been before we opened Concorde. It had been quite a tourist attraction while we'd been putting it together, but once it was complete, it just took over. And the fact that you're sitting here today in a nicely restored clubhouse with all these beautiful carpets on the floor and all the other things around here, our wonderful aircraft factory, all the other exhibits that we have, the fact that there is even a museum here today is solely down to the fact that we got Delta Golf and opened it to the public, because it was the financial saviour of the museum. And that is the greatest achievement that Delta Golf ever had. And on that note, Gordon, I'll tell you how we did it.
Good afternoon, everybody. So, I've been dragging you some pictures over the course of the guys' talks, just to give you a flavour of Delta Golf. What today is not just about how we put together how Delta Golf became such an important part of this museum, but we'll just try to show you the history that Delta Golf had for the 7 years it flew, compared to the now really, 15 years it's been open here at the museum. It's been a fantastic thing for everyone. I'm just going to go back a couple of pictures, skip through that. So that was Julian Temple and I, and that was the first parts of Delta Golf to ever come back to Brooklands Museum. So when you go outside and you look at Delta Golf, and you look at the nose landing gear, there are two little small doors with DG written on them. That was the original doors, first thing we brought back. Never repainted them, so when you look at them again, that's the original paint, the maybe a bit of clean. And then there's our special control panel, which is also referred to as the Star Trek panel. So people do go back into the 70s with Captain James T. Kirk and the original Starship Enterprise. That panel looked like the panels used to get on the bridge of the Enterprise, and that was a panel that was going to be on the prototypes of the Concorde for the flight engineer. Never made it into design, it was unique for Concorde. And things were walking out of that Delta Golf hangar at Felton. Somebody walked up here first, or somebody else walked into the garden shed. So that's the story behind that photograph there. So, let's pick up where we really were, and I'll talk for 5 minutes. We'll have a quick 5 minutes, then we'll have some questions. So that was Delta Golf after the ride, ready for us to try and start fundraising. I think the key thing that Allan said was, we didn't have any money, we had just bust the bank to get Concorde here. We now need to put it together again. We could just about win fundraise to get the structural work done, but the restoration had to become the team of volunteers. We put together a team of well over 100 volunteers who were either at the museum, or as we said, that team we had with enthusiasts to come in. Enthusiasm, correctly channeled, can do wonderful things, and I think that's the key thing that we brought to that, is to focus people on the skills that they had to do this restoration here at Brooklands. That was just clearing the aircraft, sorting through parts, or where we need proper engineering skills to actually do some real serious engineering on it. So we got it all together and put tech over it, so the restoration could start working. And in the corner of that tent, we had to make this an exhibit. We had to get people coming to the museum, giving us on the day our 10, 12, 13 pounds to come into the museum to see Delta Golf being restored. It's also, what's the cockpit? It's inside that blue wrapper is the simulator. So that was also part of the exhibit that we had in the tent. To take a look at the part, we brought the drip nose over. So again, another team of volunteers had restored that broken drip nose, ready to go on. The exact same drip nose that you've seen actuating up and down today. This picture here simulates why we did it. It's fun, right? 3 or 4 times a week, the volunteer team were coming to Brooklands to work, and we had so much fun doing it. So, what's this here? It's not the new rowing boat that was getting done for the Queen's Diamond Jubilee. This is the team using the bits of wood that they built that holds the back cabin up out the windows to protect the window row Concorde back to service. And it just signifies that team effort where everybody was just stuck in to do the right thing. There's another picture when Allan was talking about the University of Surrey students. Health and safety would never let that happen now. But they went down to Tesco's, bought all their sandwiches, and sat in the wing and had their lunch right up in the wing of Concorde. We never even do that now. Put the door back on it, some alarm goes off somewhere. Don't do it. A few other pictures towards the topping out ceremony. So again, one of those, like today, hottest day of the year, and we're all in sunburnt, putting the tail fin back on Concorde. We're really lucky about the tools and special stuff was still available to us, and that was one of the first things we did. I remember we did the museum. The first book I pulled out of the archive of parts was the tooling manual. It wasn't about looking at all the bits that were missing, it was about looking at the tools that we need to do the job with. So we could ask EA, we need this special tool, we need this jig, we need that sling. So actually the first things to arrive here at the museum wasn't actually part of the aircraft, it was actually all the tooling to allow us to do the job. And you can see the special sling attached down to the tail fin, which fun enough was then used by the guys up in East Fortune to put their tail fin back on. And there we go, at the end. Completed, ready for the grand opening. We're not doing a video just yet, so we'll do some Q&A. If you're interested, we're a good page review. We thought we maybe would do 20 years since this big restoration is 12 to 18 months' time, so maybe this time next year we'll come back and do a proper, real deep dive on the full restoration. But I just paid tribute to the people who are volunteers at the museum now, volunteers in the past, some of them are here today and still come in. That team of 100 people was the success of restoring Delta Golf. other museums can spend millions of pounds. We did significantly less money than that, and it took 4 years. It took 2 years to get it open, and 2 years to finish after that, and then we started the simulator. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you very much, Jean. It's fascinating and so many different elements that I just didn't know, so thank you for sharing that all with us. Thank you. At this point, I would like to open out to the room to see if you've got any questions for our panel. Lovely. First taker, I'm on my way.
Thank you. A question for, I guess, Mike. I remember watching you on television when the last flight Concorde, or the last 3 Concordes or 4 Concordes came into Heathrow, and you said that you looked back and suddenly realised that there were 5 perfectly serviceable aircraft. And if you wind the clock forward now and maybe think of the Alpha Foxtrot down at Filton, she stands there dust-free, still with that beautiful new smell. How much would it take to get her airborne again?
Thank you, Mike.
Fortunately, I'm a practicing Christian. So a lot of prayer and a huge amount of money and a complete change in regulations. And those 3 things, the prayer, keep doing it, the money would be phenomenal because the airplane's not flown for 20 years. The airplane itself now would take a huge amount to get her back into a condition where she could fly. And also, when you look at the whole regulatory framework behind civil aviation, there's a lot of rules, regulations that you have to pass before you can fly an airplane. Critical amongst those, the thing is called the type certificate, which is the manufacturer's certification to build and certify the airplane. That was surrendered in 2003. The air operator certificate, which is the operator's license, the airline's license to fly the airplane, that was surrendered in 2003. And the experience of the individuals that are associated with the airplane. Us pilots and flight engineers, we're lucky. We've got this fantastic simulator, we can go and fly that, and we could keep reasonably in touch with what it was all about, and probably could retrain relatively easily. The real experience depth is amongst the engineers. The engineering effort, energy, knowledge and skill that went into getting the airplane in the first place was built on layer by layer by layer as the airplane was in service, and so there was a huge depth of skill. Sadly, 20 years later, that's distilled and diluted, not by any direct action, it's just a factor of time. And so sadly, I think I wouldn't want to put a figure on it because I believe it would be sadly impossible. It could happen. But my glasses always are full, so I look at the future and see other aircraft developments coming along the line, one of which is the LOWE Overture, which hopefully will fly relatively soon and go into service. Guess what? It looks remarkably like a coffin.
Lovely, thank you. And I'm just going to make my way across to this lady over here. Hello.
Hi Mike, on a similar theme, at the time we knew that Richard Branson wanted it. What stopped him getting it?
Richard Branson is very good at what he does, exquisitely good. And we knew that he would be vociferous about what we were planning to do with Concorde when we announced retirement. And so we sort of war-gamed it inside BA about what our reaction would be. And we came to the conclusion the best tactic was not to say anything. And that's not just dereliction, we thought it through in great detail. Because Richard Branson would say, I want the aeroplane. And he would position it to say, this aeroplane only costs £5. Well, that's what it was written down to on the BA books because we'd had it for so long. It actually cost millions. But the BA response, we could not say anything that would be right. Because when he says we want the aeroplane, if we got involved in the debate, we'd lose. Because if we gave him the aeroplane and he made a success of it, which he wouldn't have done, but if he did, he'd say, they are British Airways, didn't look after it properly. If we didn't give him the aeroplane, which we didn't, he'd say, they are BA being beastly to me again. And if we just didn't give it to anybody, it would be better than giving it to him. So while this debate was going on, the chief pilot of Virgin rang me up one day and said, Mike, is there any possibility of us getting this aeroplane at all? And I said, well, I'm terribly sorry, no, there isn't. And he said, thank God for that, because it would bankrupt us, which it would have done. Because financially, if BA can't support it, Virgin never could either. So the airplane outside still belongs to British Airways, as do all of the ex-British Airways airplanes. One of the reasons that it belongs to British Airways is to stop any subsequent owner striking a deal with, let's say, a notional airline called Virgin Atlantic, who would pay the museum a lot of money to paint Virgin on the side. So British Airways decided the best way to stop that happening was to retain ownership, which is why they did.
Thank you. And I think John's got a response as well.
I can just add a little bit to that, because I talked at length to Richard Branson. He was dead serious, he did want it. But it would need the British government to converse with the French government and to get the design authority handed over and so on. So he, Branson, communicated with Patricia Hewitt, who was the Minister for Business Affairs in the government. And she spent 3 days thinking about it, probably talking to BA. But she said, it's just too difficult. It's too difficult to get it from BA. It's too difficult to get the French to agree. They've stopped, and so stopped. But I think he genuinely wanted it, and he would probably have made a bit of money with it, but it wasn't to be.
So Gordon, I do have a quick question, and then I'm going to come to this young man, so I can see you. I just have a question for Gordon, and it is about the restoration, because we've all seen the state in which Delta Golf arrived here. So I'm interested to know which was the hardest part to A, track down, to put back into the plane, and how long did that take? And sorry for putting you on the spot like this.
I think there's a lot of split bits and pieces here. Throughout the whole process, spare parts, we knew BA never threw anything away. That was always the story. BA never threw anything away unless it's completely damaged and beyond any repair. So inside that hangar at Filson, which you see the Delta Golf go into, was every part that we had, apart from bits that weren't in there. The bit that we had a little bit of a worry about for part of the time was the nose landing gear. BA could not find a spare nose landing gear. So we had a sleepless month going, we've got Concorde coming and we've no nose landing gear for it. It did get found deep in storage at the overhaul facility. The other bit we never had for a while, which is actually coming off the aircraft for restoration, is the cargo hold door. So when you got the back stairs and you went through the cargo hold, couldn't find that door. Eventually, a friend at the museum who worked for BA phoned us up one day and said, I think I found your door. So we all went up to BA, gets badged up, into the security, down into the guns of Tech Blockade, the big hangar, and lo and behold, there was the famous rear cargo door, plus a lot of the other bits of it that we thought, that bit's lost, we're never going to have that back. So the two key things, cargo hold door, nose landing gear, and we could do with some droop nose lock release jacks, if anyone's got them still.
Thank you very much. I'm going to make my way round to this young man. So,
this is a question to Mike Bannister. And how did it feel to go twice at the speed of sound?
Lovely, that's a fabulous question, and I know two men who would be able to answer that for us.
I think that's a question that we should all answer in turn. For me personally, wonderful. It's amazing that if you travel so quickly, if you listen to Einstein, you get younger every time you travel faster. And obviously travelling twice the speed of sound, you get younger and younger, which accounts for why we all look so young. It was great fun. It was an airplane you could fly with your fingertips through takeoff, climb, acceleration, supersonic cruise, deceleration, landing. An absolute joy to fly and to operate. Very rewarding to move this very complex piece of machinery. from A to B, London to New York on time, in comfort, with the greatest crews in the world. And the most important part of all of it was working with one of the team that were wrapped around Concorde. At any given time, there were about 250 people in the Concorde family, as we called it, out of, say, 42,000 British Airways employees, so ground staff, ground engineers, cabin crew, flight engineers, pilots, check-in agents, baggage loaders, all that team. And we worked just like a family. Being part of that family was superb. I'm going to ask Jock to take the microphone and tell me what he thought flying faster than a bullet felt like.
Okay, thanks, Mike. It was a wonderful experience, but you couldn't feel much. In fact, there's a famous story about the politician who was probably most responsible for it carrying on, was a chap called Wedgwood Ben, and he was flying with Sir George Edwards, who was the boss of British Aerospace as it became. He was the head. He was the father of Concorde, and apparently. Politician said, "Oh, what's the trouble?" He said, "Flying, sitting up here at twice the speed of sound, it's just like being in any other aeroplane." And Sir George replied, "Yeah, that was the difficult part. That's what was really a challenge beyond belief." But for me, the thing that kept reoccurring to me, the memory, was when we took off from London in the winter, in the evening, and it was dark, the sun had set a couple of hours before, and then after an hour or two, it would start to get light. But the sun was rising in the west and not in the east. We were going faster than the Earth's rotation speed, and it always struck me. We'd have to put map up to keep the sun out of our eyes, but never mind, it was a great experience. So we were just very lucky to be there, and as Mike says, we were all about 250 million to the second younger each time.
Lovely, thank you so much. We have time for one more question and then we're going to have to wrap up. And I think I saw a lady over here. So bear with me, everyone.
I just wondered if there were any female pilots on the Concorde, or was it all male?
I'm going to pass across. Who would like to take this one for me? Thank you.
Female pilots was the question, yeah. I guess I was responsible when I was chief pilot at BA for going on a recruitment drive for lady pilots, and they wanted to be called lady pilots because I asked them. And I did always imagine that out of the 40 or 50 of the initial intake, some of them would want to fly Concorde, but none of them put themselves forward except one young lady called Barbara Harmer, and she had started life as a hairdresser. And she somehow got a pilot's license, then a commercial license, and then went to fly for BCAL, and then came to BA. And with that background, she wanted to fly Concorde, and she did. Sadly, she died a few years ago. But yes, Barbara was our famous female addition to the lady pilots, to the pilots of Concorde. So yeah, there was one.
One in France.
And one in France too.
Beatrice, yeah.
Would you share with us about Beatrice from France quickly then, please, Gordon? Thank you.
So I was just going to say, towards the end, there was a lovely woman in France, Beatrice Yanni, I believe, and she was right up to the very end. So on that final day when their Concords retired at the end of May, because they made the decision to finish early, she was one of the crew there. So some famous pictures if you were to do your look through Google of Beatrice hanging out the TV window, waving to the crowds as they attracted others services to the end. And to pay final tribute to Barbara, she came here during the administration a couple of times over the years. There's a picture of you, myself and Barbara, and me in our boiler suit covered in paint from doing a day's work. And all the engineers, and this with the male pilots, will probably watch with their fingers and their ears, all the engineers used to fly test flights and check flights, and the aircraft said, Barbara flew it better than the men.
Lovely. And just one final comment from Mike.
And I was going to build on that. We've touched on the fact that we are very proud to have the Concorde simulator here at Brooklands. The original simulator that all the pilots, flight engineers were trained on, as was Brian Trupshaw and the team. The one that we did all of our 6 monthly checks on, and Gordon and his team put it together. When it arrived here, it was on the back of a low-load. I thought it would be parked in the back of a hangar somewhere and just as a static exhibit, but no. Burnished by the success of what he'd done with the aeroplane, the team went on to do the simulator as well. And it now flies as well as it ever flew with British Airways. If you wanted to come and fly, you could. There is a fee, of course, but you would fly with an original British Airways pilot, myself and one of my colleagues, and you would do the takeoff, you would fly around, you would do the landing. It's a huge experience, and it's the reason why His Royal Highness Prince Michael is not here with us, because he wanted to be. It sends his special regards. He's actually flying the simulator as we speak. But going back to the original question,
I've just jumping in there. I've just taken him in the simulator. He flew it very well, and he even had the audacity to fly it under Tower Bridge.
The benefits of royalty. And this is not a sexist comment, it's just factual. When we fly our guests on a simulator, we find that in general, the female guests are better than the male guests flying the aeroplane. I think the reason is the female guests listen to what their instructor says and then do it, and do it again, and do it very well. The male guests listen to what their instructor says, do it for a little bit, and then think, I've got this, and that testosterone kicks in and they do it their own way. So, in general, I'd have to say the female pilots we fly with generally end up better than males. Sorry about that, chaps.
Well, once again, it comes to me to say thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. I hope you found it as fascinating as I have indeed here. So 50 years of Delta Golf. Incredible, what an incredible achievement from flying, being the first plane to carry over 100 people at twice the speed of sound, to then her incredible journey to us here at Brooklands, and amazing work from the teams who got her up and running, and indeed the teams who continue to look after her with us every week and every day. So thank you very much to everyone, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've had a marvellous day. Thank you.